Welcome to the Ask the Geographer podcast series, brought to you by the Education Department at the Royal Geographical Society with IBG. I'm Rachel, your host, and in each episode, I'll be joined by geographers from across the globe to delve into current events, publications, and research, all tied to the fascinating world of geography. Environmental degradation of our land, water, and air is not just an ecological but an economic issue, which in turn has an impact on development. In this episode of Ask the Geographer, I'm joined by Richard Damania, who is the Chief Economist of the Sustainable Development Practice Group for the World Bank. The World Bank has recently released a report into the connection between the economy and the environment. The report, titled Reboot Development, the Economics of a Livable Planet, explores the issues around a declining environment, its connection to the economy, as well as how futures could be managed to improve both areas for everyone. Richard is an economist, and for this podcast, he will help identify issues from the report which interest geographers. Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure.
Could you tell me a little bit about your role within the World Bank?
First, let me start by telling everyone what the World Bank is. Well, the World Bank is a very large global organization, and what it does is it lends money and gives grants mainly to poor countries to do good things, to develop their economies, to build infrastructure, to educate, for health, and also for the environment and sustainability. And that's the branch of the World Bank in which I work. It's called the Planet Vice Presidency. I'm the Chief Economist there. And our role mainly is to have development and economic growth that is sustainable, because we know that if it's not sustainable, it won't last. We also know that irrespective of whether it's sustainable or not, some things are simply wrong that you should not do, and we want to stop that from actually happening. So our role is to lend money, but also to act as thought leaders or to put ideas out there and to have them debated and to have them contested. And that's why we've put this report out.
The report highlights that around 90% of people worldwide live with at least one environmental challenge, whether that's polluted air, degraded land, or water insecurity. In low-income countries, about 80% of people are facing all three at once. Could you bring this to life for our listeners with some real-world examples of where we see this happening?
Absolutely. Before I give you examples, let's remind ourselves that to have a decent life, and indeed to live a healthy life, we need clean air to breathe, we need clean water to drink, and we need fertile land on which to grow our food. What we discover is that 80% of people living in low-income countries simultaneously have bad air, bad water, and infertile soils. Examples: much of Africa, especially West Africa, endures unhealthy air, inadequate water, and when the water is available, it's often highly polluted, and of course soils that are degrading for a variety of reasons, including overuse, as well, of course, as due to some of the impacts of climate change and erosion. But it is not just a problem for poor countries. You can go to Europe, you can go to any of the rich countries, and you will see similar problems. Perhaps not of the same magnitude, perhaps not all occurring simultaneously, but you certainly see it. So, for example, parts of the Mediterranean, there is drastic, massive soil erosion and infertility occurring. Some of it is due to overgrazing. Other bits are due to overuse, if you like, over-enthusiastic use of the plough. Very often, it's industrial, mine sites that are left in a parlous state. Air, too, is a major problem. Now, we may not see the smogs that we saw in previous decades in the major cities of Europe, London, Paris, Berlin, but that doesn't mean the air is always healthy. What we know is that quite regularly the safe limits for clean air in terms of nitrogen dioxide are exceeded in many of our major cities in Europe. Water, that's a major problem in rich countries and developed countries. Wherever you have pig farming, especially of the intensive type, you tend to get immense amounts of water pollution. Parts of northern France, the UK, agricultural runoff that you get in the UK. And indeed, in many countries, as we know, not a single river is in a good, environmentally healthy state. And why that matters is, of course, it matters for the environment, but it also matters for the economy, because bad air, for example, affects people's health. It affects their ability to think, their cognitive abilities, and that feeds into the economy. Likewise, of course, with clean water. We all need clean water, otherwise we get sick. And of course, with fertile soils too. So I hope that was some examples that were useful.
Definitely. And the report also warns that the poor environmental management can also come with huge price tag. Is there a particular example that stands out to you, one that really shows the scale of this economic cost?
Well, there's very many examples, but let me give you perhaps two. Probably one of the biggest problems the world confronts is that of air pollution. And this is the smog you see in many a city. The number of lives lost to air pollution exceeds the lives lost to all forms of war and violence every year. And that comes with an economic price tag on economic growth. It comes with a price tag on labor productivity. On polluted days, we are all much less productive than we would have been. Another great example is, we think of forests and we think of these as simply being nice places to go for a hike or great places to go bird watching and for biodiversity. But what people don't realize is that forests act as sponges. And when the dry season comes, and when the drought comes, and the dry season always comes and the drought always comes, where you have upstream forests, these forests retain moisture like a sponge and ensure that the downstream farms have more soil moisture and therefore remain more productive when it's dry, because you can't irrigate everywhere. It's too expensive, does too much damage, and so on. And if you calculate what that sponge effect does, it's $300 billion a year, which is a massive number. So we've grossly underestimated what the forests are doing for us. In addition, of course, they're clean water, they're clean air, they're important for carbon sequestration, and so on. So natural habitats, forests, are perhaps one of our most valuable assets that the world has, and they are indeed in a dreadful parlous state, being deforested and being destroyed at too rapid a rate.
You just alluded to the role that forests play, but something our geographers would be really interested in is how protecting the environment as a whole can bring benefits to economies. Is there a case where an environmental intervention has not only helped nature, but has also boosted growth in jobs or the economy?
Oh, no number of such examples. So let me start with something we haven't spoken about yet. It is the case that we need fertilizers to grow food productively, especially nitrogen fertilizer. And some would say it is perhaps the greatest human intervention and invention because it has enabled so much food to be produced on Earth. And by the way, we produce more than enough food to feed everyone. 3,000 kilocalories per person per day. That's more than enough food to feed everyone. If anyone is hungry, it's because the food is not affordable or we can't get the food to them. So it's a problem of distribution, not production. A lot of that is thanks to nitrogen fertilizer. But too much of a good thing. We put so much nitrogen down that it goes to waste. In fact, it goes to waste to such an extent that it is burning crops, harming the soil. 50% of calories produced on Earth are produced in places where they are burning crops, burning the soil. It's called diminishing returns in economics. Quite simply, that means if we reduce the amount of nitrogen we put on, crop yields would go up, you would save money, it would be a win-win-win all around. It doesn't stop there. Too much nitrogen that you put into the soil, where does it go? It doesn't remain in the soil. It gets leached into water. Once in water, it forms blue-green algae. If the concentrations are too high, it gets toxic and it gives children something called blue baby syndrome. That means blood doesn't flow in the infant turns blue, and indeed it can be fatal. At lower levels, it causes cancers. and thyroid problems. All of that can be avoided. All of that brings health benefits, economic benefits that are direct and at a massive level. I'd mentioned earlier, the advantage of having good forests over there. $300 billion a year is not something to laugh at. It's a major, major, major contribution that we are getting from our forests. And the examples go on. So clean air, clean water, and fertile lands are absolutely foundational to economies. They're foundational to the environment, and they're foundational to having a decent life.
Absolutely. There's another theme in the report which economists and geographers share is the role of data, whether that's air quality monitors or satellite images, in shaping policies and empowering people. Why do you think data has become such a powerful tool in driving change?
One of the wonderful things of the 21st century is the amount of new environmental and geographic data that we have, and the tools we have through GIS and other programs to actually analyze this data as well. But that's not the only reason why the data is so wonderful. If we don't have the data, if we don't have information, we cannot manage. We don't know what's happening. You don't know how much pollution you've got in water. You don't know what the pollution is in the air. You don't know the level of land degradation. You don't know the level of soil moisture, which is oh so important. So we need the data to manage. But that's only one reason why we need the data. I think, and this is my personal opinion, and there is some research to back it, we need data to inform people. Because if I get, say, respiratory problems like asthma, which is due to air pollution, I have no way of knowing it unless I'm informed by scientists, by doctors, by researchers that it is that smog that is causing the respiratory problems, that it is the dirty water that is causing diarrhea in children and therefore they're getting sick and they can't go to school, and so on. So it's information that creates the demand for a cleaner environment. If people didn't know about the sewage spillovers that were experienced recently, they just simply wouldn't know what was happening. They would just, observe things. They wouldn't know why it's happening. The information is vital. Once people had that information, that then enabled policymakers to take the actions that were required. Without the information, you won't get the demand or the knowledge for a better environment, and you simply won't get the policy change that is required because people need to want it for it to happen. Because it's hard to do, it's often expensive to do, and there's so many other things that governments are busy with. They're not going to pay attention to a problem that is invisible. So it is making the invisible visible with data.
Thinking critically, of course, data isn't perfect. Do you think there are any risks or limitations when it comes to relying on data to guide decisions about the environment and development?
That's a really good question. Perhaps there's 2 or 3 reasons why we should be cautious. Very often our data can be bad, and putting too much weight on it and imagining that this is perfect and accurate would be very misleading. And very often when we put a number, people tend to think, oh my God, there's this number, it's got to be accurate. But no, we're always revising, we're always improving our measurement, and we're always improving how we calculate things. So we need a level of modesty and humbleness when we are dealing with data. So that's one. The second reason is that, very often data can be misleading too. Suppose we said Jane Smith has £1 million. Is that a lot? Is that too little? Let's compare Jane Smith to Robert Jones, who has £1 billion. It would take Jane 100 years of her life earning £1 million to become that billionaire. So understanding the scale and the magnitude does require some thought and education and a knowledge of where we are. So there are nuances to data. It can be inaccurate, but it can also be misleading because I can tell you, so-and-so has got £1 million. It's an outrageously large sum, but it's nowhere nearly as large as £1 billion and £100 billion and so on. So those are the sort of dangers we need to be wary of.
For you, what one thing stands out in this report which geographers could use in their studies?
What the report highlights through from start to finish, everything has a major spatial scale. So it's the spatial scale of problems. That's the first thing. The second thing is the interaction. No environmental problem stands alone. One impacts the other and impacts the other. And again, this has a spatial dimension. I chop down trees, this affects water, the water runs off downstream, and then there's a health issue. This has a distinct spatial component. If we ignore the spatial component, we tend to lose the accuracy that is now available with the new data. So geographers and economists do work a lot together, especially environmental economists, and for very good reason. So we both need each other, I think, the environmental economists and the geographers, and we need to do a lot more work together.
How can the information we have at our disposal give students hope for the future?
Well, information is power, especially in the hands of students, because the students are going to be the agents of change. Students of today are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, and they need to be informed, and they need to build on the information they have now, which will improve and get better. What we are talking about is problems that are stubborn, and we need the information to come up with better solutions. So I very much hope that the students will be thoughtful and respond appropriately in driving change in a way that is informed and keeps getting informed and driving them forward.
Thank you for joining us today, Richard. With this report identifying that managing natural systems well can deliver growth, jobs, health improvements and resilience, especially in low-income countries, it is important for economists and geographers alike to see that sustainability and development are interdependent. It is therefore our role to explore ways in which we can improve both the environment and, in turn, the economy for the whole planet. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe to the Ask the Geographer podcast series on soundcloud.com or your preferred streaming platform. Dive deeper into the world of geography and stay informed with our wide range of resources, many of which are available for free. School membership grants access to even more resources, including online lectures and supporting materials for both teachers and learners. Explore our resources and discover our additional offers for education at www.rgs.org/schools.